Hello, this is Greg Salmieri. I'm coming live as part of the Atlas Project Live. This is the episode 17. We've been having some technical difficulties here with our normal way of setting things up. I don't know why that is, but it seems to have to do with something to do with connectivity to the Facebook Live service from the software we're using. It's particularly unfortunate that this should be happening today because I'm here on location in Irvine at the headquarters of the Ayn Rand Institute, the offices of the Ayn Rand Institute. Betsy, could you please shut that off? Thanks. Sorry, there's people behind. There are people in this direction. You can see we have a lovely audience with us. And we have a great group with us all the time in New York. But I guess we should introduce some future broadcasts. But today I'm particularly pleased to have with us, a lot of Southern California locals, a lot of the staff of the Institute, including Keith Lockridge back there, and Lucy, who've both been a big part of the behind-the-scenes work getting the project going. And especially excited to have with me Ankar Gate and Robert Mayhew. Robert's the editor of this book, which I'm forever recommending on him, and Ankar, the essays in Ayn Rand at the Shrugged, and Ankar, one of the contributing authors, as I am also. I should say, Ben has joined. Now, one of the difficulties of going live on Facebook, the old-fashioned way, as I described it, is that I don't think I have a way to conference Ben in, even Ben's audio. But Ben, if I'm going to do this in a super quick fashion, I'm just going to call you up on my telephone and put it on speakerphone near the microphone, so we'll at least be able to hear you. And what I suspect happened is something about Facebook's service change such that it can't be logged into via the app we've been using. Ben, are you here? Ben? You answered, but I don't hear you, even though you're on speaker. Is my volume low?
Yeah, but I have to get some.
Okay.
Yeah,
so anyway.
Here, but I have to get headphones.
Okay. Well, I apologize for all the technical difficulties. We've got all these cameras. I had to go through airport security with all this equipment, and it's all for naught. I mean, we'll still have a good show, but we won't have all the bells and whistles, alas. So, but I still at least have access to my outline and notes. So let's just begin. Then I don't know how well you'll be able to be heard, but you'll be able to be heard somewhat. I have the speakerphone near the phone, and maybe I'll do the summary comments on things, but I'm actually not sure which of these two mics is going into the air. All right. Anyway, to begin, we are talking about, this is episode 17. We're talking about part 2, chapter 7 of the novel, which is the Moratorium on Brains. That's perhaps a description of what's going on in the background technologically here. It's also a description Francisco D'Ancona used in chapter 6 to describe the directive 10289 that's just been passed on the phone call with Daphne. And the chapter has 3 sequences. Recall the sequences of those divisions marked off by stars. We start off with Eddie talking to the worker, as he's wont to do. Then we have a scene with a desolate Rearden walking 2 hours home from work to Philadelphia, who encounters Ragnar Danneskjold. And then we have the famous and a very controversial, you'll find a lot written on this on the web, discussion of the collapse of the Taggart Tunnel, the tunnel catastrophe. And we're going to go through these scenes in order. We'll spend most of our time, I think, on the tunnel catastrophe, but we want to talk a little bit about the other 2 scenes first. Ben, the way I have things ordered right now, I can't read the comments. Can you say something like, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now.
Right.
So
but can you,
my voice is going out, but I will tell you what I see on the comments.
I'm wondering if the people in the world can hear your voice just from the speakerphone, but if not, I will do some of the things that you would have done where your voice better on. Okay, so let's just kind of quickly dive in again with apologies for the technical. So we can't be blamed for it. It's a force of nature. Okay. So what's going on in this first scene with Eddie and the worker? We've been thinking a bit about what these scenes are for in the novel. They're clearly a way to give us some insight into Eddie's thought. They are a kind of expositional device. We learn some of what's going on in Tetra Transcontinental. We've had some speculation about whether there's anything more going on in these scenes than that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But just what's going on, just what do we learn about Eddie and the state of affairs? I'll just make a few observations. There are a lot of reports about what started to happen since this directive has been issued. There are deserters, people who are leaving their jobs, although it's against the law. There's not enough food. They can't keep them in jail. These people are just out roaming around kind of as outlaws. They're described as human driftwood. Eddie tells us a little bit about how Tetra Transcontinental is dealing with Daphne's absence. She's quit, but nobody acknowledges that she's quit. They have this guy, Clifton Losey, who's a friend of Jim's, and acts like Jim, right? And we had a question about Clifton Losey's manner of operation. He said that he's filling the role unofficially as vice president for operations, Daphne's job. And as Greg, Corey, and David all on the forum pointed out, he's someone who makes no decisions, who's always arranging things that nothing can be pinned on him. He can't be blamed. And this is something we've seen Jim doing from the very first chapter. Pooja points out, Eddie saying that Losey's not interested in doing his job, but in impressing Washington or impressing Jim. He's someone who is not motivated by a desire to run trains with. And Harry comments that he sees technological issues and issues of dealing with nature and machinery as theoretical, but dealing with that Chip Morrison might get angry at us as a immediate practical threat. We'll talk more about Chip Morrison in a moment. I think we can just say for now he's his demand for a train to go on a speaking tour and the machinations of what happened with that, which we'll talk more about later, made Eddie almost quit, but he didn't. So we just want to raise a question. Aside from these issues of what's going on in Tetra Transcontinental and so forth, do we learn anything about Eddie and the worker from this scene? For those of us trying to think about this somewhat interesting relationship. Yeah, Betsy.
Well, Eddie is telling him things that Dagny told him not to tell, such as that where she's gone, and also we learned some things about the worker which tie in with other things.
So yeah, Daphne, not only does he's telling the worker, I'll never tell where Daphne is. They've been pumping me, they're trying to get it out of me, right? But I'll never tell anyone. No one can make me tell. And the worker, boy, you seem nervous. Is it about her? Oh, Woodstock's such a desolate place. So the worker, Eddie's very comfortable talking to him and tells him things he'd tell no one else. We've seen he's been doing that for a while now. It's a little bit of an odd relationship. What have we learned about the worker, Betsy? You said we've learned something
that he's about to take a vacation and that he's done so for 10, 12 years.
12 years.
12 years.
A month is pretty long. A month vacation.
A month vacation. And that ties in with what we knew about the inventor of the motors, the widow of, told us that her husband used to go on a month's vacation.
Hastings used to go on vacation for a month. Without telling her where he was going. Yeah, he didn't just disappear.
And not to tell your wife, but that it was somehow connected with the inventor of the motor.
So we know two people have been. This guy's been taking a month vacation every summer for 12 years, and he's a pretty low-level laborer. We don't know what he is, but some kind of day
Right.
worker. So it's odd that he should be able to afford to do this. Eddie can't afford to do
Yeah.
that. What?
I'm old enough to remember when railway workers had the privilege of traveling by train without having to pay for it. That was one of their benefits.
All right, so
That
maybe
was very customary in the 50s, and everyone took for granted.
but I was just thinking it would be odd for him to be able to afford not to work for a month. But you're pointing out that he might have had free rail passage. We don't know where he's going. He might just be going. He's in New York. He could be going to Atlantic City or something for the month. That would be pretty easy. All right, but anyway, this guy goes away every month for 12 years. We should be on our lookout for other things that might tie in. What?
12 years.
Yeah, and we'll see. There's one more in this chapter,
Yeah.
which we'll get to shortly. Anything else about the worker? One other thing I think is interesting in this scene. Do you guys have anything? I mean, I'll just say one thing. He's been waiting there for Eddie tonight, and Eddie thinks, I thought I was always the one who wanted to see you. You never seemed to care if I was there or not. But there are a bunch of cigarettes. He's been waiting for Eddie. He's not always waiting for Eddie, it seems, but this night he is, and waiting, like a long time that he's got these cigarettes. So that's interesting. The worker is motivated to see Eddie tonight for some reason. We don't know why that is. It is the night that Daphne's returned to the railroad, and the worker seems to know that already. He's interested in the railroad. Any other things you guys want to
Daphne
add?
return to the railroad?
Left.
Sorry, that
Yeah,
Daphne,
yeah.
sorry, that Daphne left the railroad. Sorry. Good, thanks. Yeah, but it's several weeks after he left, so it's and that's what's happened, right? The worker says you've not been here in some time, so it must be like every night maybe, or often he's sitting there waiting for him, hoping he'll come. Interesting. Okay, so let's move on. Next scene, Rearden and Ragnar. So does anybody have any observations they want to make about the scene? And let's start with Rearden before Ragnar appears, right? We're narrated some about his state of mind as he's walking home on this desolate road. Any thoughts or observations about that? Ways in which he's different than he was in the past. Yeah.
He's getting a divorce.
He's getting a divorce.
Woohoo!
Yeah, for all of those of you who've been waiting. By the way, Ben, can people hear the audience members online? Do I need to repeat what they're saying, or are there?
I can hear them through the phone. I don't know if they can hear them through the audio online.
Monitor comments about that, because I can repeat. I don't want to repeat
People
the
have been saying that
woo-hoo.
audio quality is poor, but I suspect that's because you're doing it from your phone and not through your mic.
I'm not doing it from my phone. Hold on, let me see what I
So
can.
yes, we hear.
Thank you. Thank you, people who can hear and who are telling me that. Do I have a way to control? I don't have a lot of controls. I don't want to jinx the method is now working. So let me not try to. Okay, so where were we? He's getting a divorce. He's moved out of his house. He's now moved to an apartment in Philadelphia, which seems a lot more stylish. It's a 2-hour walk from the mills, and he's walking there. How does he feel as he's walking? What's his state of mind?
I think maybe, since he's getting this divorce, but he's saying there's to be no alimony and she is not to get any property from me.
Right.
So he's not guilty, like he doesn't feel like he owes Lillian anything, and then.
Good. See, he now feels like Lillian was in the wrong. He's willing to pay anything for the divorce so long as she doesn't get any money out of it. No settlement, no property. He wants it to be as quick as possible. How does he feel about things other than the divorce? He's moved out of his house. He's let his other family members stay in the house, Philip and his mother. What else? Yeah. Jesse?
Well, on his walk, he's avoiding people. He just wants to have some time to be alone.
You guys have any observations?
I think the two commandments he mentions are important.
Yeah.
The two things he wants to do.
So,
To tell Dagny what he should have said
to
that
tell
Ellis Wyatt.
that he loves her.
Yeah, the Ellis Wyatt and the to never let her learn.
And never left. Yeah. Why he signed the
Why he signed the
There's also
medal away.
he has a different attitude towards people in the world. How do you want to?
I mean, part of it, what it says is that he feels nothing, and that he feels nothing about Rearden metal being manufactured by other people. He's lost complete connection to respect and connection towards the world of other people, and that's part of why he likes the isolation.
It doesn't matter to him whether anybody knows that the metal has been his. He doesn't even need to think of the other people as people in a way. And Ben asked the question, is he planning on quitting like Daphne has? Maybe this is a symptom of someone who's about to quit, this kind of disconnection from people. He's at some point going, he says he's going to train himself to deal with the now emptiness of his spirit, and then he's going to go to Daphne. Is he going to go and bring her back and keep running his mills? Is he going to go quit with her somewhere? We don't know, but he's...
And it's the same with Eddie. It didn't come up, but he says he almost quit, but he didn't. But you don't really get why he didn't quit. But he was driven almost to quit.
And in the encounter he's about to have, you get the idea from the other side that he might quit. Right? Is there something like he might be joining us or
soon? Yeah, he doesn't say. He knows he's not ready yet, though.
No, I mean Ragnar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So let's.
Yeah.
While we're there. So Ragnar verse pops up from. You like my Jack in the Box, Ragnar? Ragnar pops much more elegantly than do I. Suddenly he's standing there. He knows by his manner that he couldn't be a robber, and by his tone of voice, he's not a beggar. What happens? Well, Ragnar gives Rearden a bar of gold, which he says is money that's been expropriated from Rearden. He intends to refund Rearden's income tax of how long?
12 years.
The last 12 years in full and in gold. So something seems to have happened 12 years ago that got people refunding gold, going on vacation. So Ragnar shows up. He's going to refund his income tax for the last 12 years in full and in gold. And they have a conversation, right? And there's a number of key points that we get from Ragnar in this conversation. So what, and we're getting Rearden's perspective. Now, Ragnar says, it's not time yet for me to have come to you. I'm telling you this ahead of schedule. You'll join me in Ragnar's clearly part of some kind of conspiracy that he doesn't think Rearden's ready to join, but he thinks he's almost ready for something. And he's come to him ahead of schedule because why? Why is Ragnar here?
Because of justice.
Because of justice.
They couldn't stand what they could do,
Yeah, what in particular?
taking the medal away from them.
And what else do we know, taking the medal, and what else do we know about Ragnar's going on that we learned in this chapter, even from the scene of Eddie talking to this worker?
That he blew up Oren Boyle's factory for making Rearden metal.
Yeah, Ragnar blew up, and he confirms to Rearden that he did that. Nobody's going to be able to make it anywhere, and so forth. So you talked about Ragnar being very interested in justice. What is Ragnar's view of justice? What do we learn about this?
He's an avenging angel.
He's an avenging angel. That's Rearden's impression of him. How is his being there an issue of justice?
He wants to tell Rearden that there are people who care about him, that he's not hated by everybody, but there's people supremely value him.
Okay, yeah, he's giving him this bar of gold. It's yours, Mr. Rearden, right? It's not a gift. But he says what you need is not this bar of gold, but the justice that it represents. You need to know there are other people who care about justice. And what in particular is the type of, what is, Ragnar has a particular focus in his view of justice. And this is a big theme out of your talk this summer, right? Of the kind of justice in the book.
Yeah, I mean, he cares about human ability, and Rearden is a representative or superlative representative of human ability, and the medal is symbolizing that.
Yeah, Robert.
And he says, like, it's everything I admire, or everything that I want to be, and want the world to be. That's.
Well, this isn't on the justice point of view. Just a comment on it qua romantic novel. It's very unusual, the idea, because the novel begins longer than that. It begins with a beggar asking for a dime, and here we have a guy, in a culture where requests for dimes are very frequent, and he's got a bar of gold to give them, and I think that's a very kind of romantic touch, romantic in the sense of Hugo-like a touch, and I always thought that was kind of peculiar. And then he goes on to denounce someone who's, bringing him back to justice, who is often considered a hero.
Yeah, Robert. Yeah, Keith.
Well, we talked about this before the thing. I thought there were interesting parallels with this scene and the scene where Francisco meets Rearden for the first time at the party. They have a very similar kind of deferential manner towards Rearden. He's a little unsure about how Rearden's going to react to them. They're both there, and one's in a certain sense to deliver some kind of statement of justice that he's not going to get from anybody else. And
good. This is really important, Harold. I'll repeat some of it because I don't know if the wider world is hearing you and Keith. But again, Keith is saying there's a parallel to this scene and when Rearden first meets Francisco. Francisco is offering him acknowledgement, appreciation, justice that no one else has offered him. And there's also a kind of maybe tentative respect, grave respect, that's uncertain how Rearden will react and is yet, I was going to say tentative, but it's not tentative. He's very self-confident about what he's doing, but in a way where he's, there's a caution about it, self-control caution. Are there other parallels to Francisco? I think there are a couple. Yeah, Betsy.
Well, one is that in both cases, he verbalizes why he should despise him and not want to deal with him and so forth, that morally condemn what the person's doing, but inwardly his own emotional reaction is positive.
Good. So both cases, Rearden condemns Francisco. He condemns Rhett. I don't want the help of the pirate. And yet, we'll talk more about it in the Ragnar case, but we've seen in Francisco's case, he loves him. And we can see, even from the beginning, he made a huge impact on him. Yeah, Keith.
Well, the other parallel is the issue of impatience and being too soon. We saw that a few chapters ago.
Yes. Francisco says, you've made me impatient for the first time. And likewise, Ragnar. There are two of them. I mean, Ragnar laughs at one point after Rearden thinks he's cold on him, and he laughs, and it's like the sun or something. And although the two did not resemble each other, the laugh made him think of Francisco d'Antonio.
Smile.
Sorry. Smile.
It's a silent laugh.
It's a silent laugh.
Yeah.
The smile made him think of Francisco d'Antonio. And there's one other thing. I mean, Ragnar says why he came. He said, and there's another reason. I have a friend who would give anything or something, I forget, to be with you tonight, but he can't. And so I've come. Now, we know that Ragnar and Francisco know each other. They went to college together. We've already learned that. They're two of the three students that were shared by Axton and Stadler. We don't know who this third is. So these are people, at least they once knew each other. And Francisco almost certainly would give anything to be with Rearden at a time like this. But can't, right? Francisco, who swore by the woman he loved that he was still Rearden's friend, but knew Rearden was going to damn him. Why was Rearden going to damn him again? What was going to happen?
The copper was being sold.
By who?
Ragnar.
By Ragnar. So there's another reason to think Francisco and Ragnar are connected to each other. Now you'd think Rearden would be pretty annoyed at Ragnar too for that, and he does. He damns him, right? Why does he damn him?
He's a pirate.
He's a pirate.
And I mean, there seems to be this tension in Rearden between, well, what would have been alluded to before, between this idea of what is right and what he has a sense of is good, which goes, I mean, we see that most emphatically the morning after the first time he sleeps with Dagny.
Yeah. So even if he feels some desire for this or some positive response, think it's wrong or somehow bad. There are, I think, a few other sides of it, right? Recall we were tracing this theme in Rearden where his reaction to the Wyatt fire, right? He burst out laughing and he suppressed that because he can't see down to the root of that. Then again, it happened with Francisco's instigating the stock market crash. These are like
and the real tensions, I mean, it's happened almost simultaneously.
Yeah, it's like a break. And now, what does he say about Ragnar?
I would just want to go back to what you mean by he damns him, because he doesn't really, but he thinks he should. And I think that's different than
It seems
And that can be a sign of progression.
and
He's lost some of the confidence in the judgment he would have had.
yeah, and he says there's no standards left anymore. And I think if you think in the whole chapter, Eddie talks about breaking the law and that he would have had a certain attitude towards Ragnar, but now he actually hopes that
God
rumors
blessed
are true.
him and maybe never catch him.
And Rearden in his divorce, it's not just get a divorce by any means, including if you have to frame her by judges. So he's willing to break the law in order to get rid of Lillian. So he doesn't know what to think. So he thinks he should damn, but he doesn't do it.
Yeah. But he won't accept his help.
Yeah.
And then why not? Because I think this is connected to the, what was it, before moving into damn. This is a really good point. That, if it comes to where I have to be helped by a pirate, right? Nobody else lives by my standards, but this is a bridge too far, where I'm going to be living in a way where a pirate is my helper and defender. I'm going to go down with my world and with my standards. And although I guess he didn't say he damn, it only feels like he should, he does say, although he doesn't do it, that, take the gold back, use it to buy some new shield. I'm going to put the police on your trail. I'm going to tell them everything about you. I'm going to do it in my own self-protection. Now, there's a really interesting line here. Does anybody catch this? How Ragnar responds to that? It's on page 581 of the big edition. I don't know what page it's on there. Do it in my own self-protection. I know exactly what you mean, says Ragnar. What does he know that he means? What does he mean that Ragnar knows? And why exactly, not why I know what you mean. It suggests that Ragnar sees further into this than Rearden does, as Francisco often does. What's he trying to protect? Let's leave that as a question, not to answer. I think it's
along that same vein, it's the contradictions through part one, where Francisco says, where you think there's a contradiction, you have to check your premises. And like he meets Francisco and he's expecting this playboy who's a total fool, and he's not. And then he meets Ragnar and he expects a criminal, and he's not. And so, like, when he's walking by himself, he feels empty and lost and no idea where he stands with people. And then the people that he feels hopeful around, or he feels admiration for, are people that, by outside standards, he should not.
Or by his own standards, he should not. A playboy. Now he's learned Francisco wasn't a playboy, but whether he still believes that. And a pirate. It's not someone else's standard. Now, he's learned from Ragnar that Ragnar is doing something other than normal piracy, but he can't accept it exactly. Yeah.
Well, also it's because Rearden always accepts responsibility for his own welfare and so forth, so he can't let someone else do it for him.
He can't let someone help him.
Yeah.
Although he got to a point where he was ready to let Francisco help him, and he was accepting that Francisco was helping him.
But that's
But it didn't work out well for him.
no, and that's an essential tension there.
Okay, so the cops, he gets a chance, we get a chance to see if he'll make good on this, putting the cops on his trail. Why?
And leaving the gold.
And leaving the gold also. Right? So the cops show up. Rearden saves Ragnar's life, right? He lies. I haven't seen him. Oh, who's that? He says, that's my bodyguard.
Yeah.
Harry pointed, also I should say, he's pointing, he's got a gun. He's pointing the gun in his jacket at the cops and realizes he was ready to use it on them. So not only did he not turn Ragnar in, he was ready to shoot 2 police officers to save him. And why? Harry made a comment that Ben kind of flagged for us. Too bad Ben's not able to be with us more fully in voice to point out his own observations about these. But Harry made a comment that at this point, Rearden is thinking of Ragnar's body, his body as it is under the clothing that would be, offered up to torture or execution. Why is it this that changes his mind? That's the question that Ben asked. Why is this the thought that did? Why not any of Ragnar's arguments about how, Ragnar did make arguments. We're in an unjust society, in a society where plunder is done by law, and the act of justice or restitution must be done underground. Rearden didn't seem moved by that. Why is he thinking of his body? Yeah.
Well, in that particular section, what he says is that he sees immediately it's a question of existence or non-existence. That if he goes, his body, his whole being disappears. So it's not a theory for him. It's almost like, reminds me of the Dagny's experience in the train. Suddenly it's there. And he's seeing it and he can't even look at it.
Other, I think that's...
But also he feels protective toward him, that he wants to protect him against the cops. And that's in direct opposite to his actual statements.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that conflict, which you've seen with Francisco, with Dagny, between what he really feels and what he verbalizes.
This conflict between what he feels and what he verbalizes, his motives at 2 different levels. Yes. Any other thoughts on this scene?
Well, there's another parallel with Francisco with the furnace breakout, and he leaps across to save them, and their bodies are pressed up against him.
It's a kind of erotic character. I mean, this is, I don't think what I'm about to say isn't the author's intent. That is to imply any kind of homosexual or homoerotic attraction between these characters. But a lot of people on the Facebook thread were seeing it there, and you can see why they would see it there, right? I mean, there's a kind of focus on the length of his body and a kind of caring or love or something for him that is very physical. And you can see why some people would read it in this way, or what it is that's doing off. And that's going on here too. Well,
I think it's because she's so focused on reality. I mean, she's so, like,
the author is right.
Yeah, like his intellect is important and, it's part of who he is, but, I think like someone's physical existence is the utmost. I mean, that's you.
Yeah, and there's also, it's the thing, your physical existence is you, it's you the utmost. It's also thinking of someone's body and the motions of someone's body really stresses, maybe this is another way of making the same point, that he's alive. Life and vitality, and think of that kind of a theme that's been running through this book. The body that will be wiped out of existence.
And she talks about posture and movement and head held high and looking in eyes.
And the people around Rearden seem lifeless to him, right? And the whole world seems lifeless and desolate and empty. And here's a man,
I mean, the human shapes moving past him in the streets of the city were physical objects without any meaning. Is the way it's described.
Yeah, and so to take it as a life, like not he's a soul he's not physical. He's a live object, which is in a way physical, but a body with meaning, a body.
And I think we get the sense that it's not just a Rearden's jauntist view of people. Something has. I mean, if you were to pick random people on a train, they would not. They would not tend to be good people. I mean, at least that's what we're going to get in the next section. There.
Yeah, that's it. So it's both. There's something wrong with the people around him, but also his view of them has this fact about them is really in sharp relief for him, or it's the salient fact about people right now, in a way that it wasn't always. Okay, so after this, Ragnar leaves. Rearden said he's not going to take the gold bar. Ragnar says, okay, it's yours, but I'm not taking it back. He can leave it there. How does he feel after Ragnar leaves? And what does he do? And what's the significance of that? I'll just read it. This is on 584. He stood on the edge of an empty road in a spread of loneliness vaster than it had seemed before. Interesting. Why would it be vaster? He knows that Ragnar is here and that it should be less. The spread of loneliness vaster than it had seemed before. Then he saw lying at his feet an object wrapped in burlap, with one corner exposed and glistening in the moonlight, the color of the pirate's hair. He bent and picked it up and walked on. Yeah, that's it.
Well, it reminds him of Ragnar and what he stood for, and he wants it, so he took it.
Yeah, you want to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think the vastness that it's lonelier than before is that there was nothing in the world, and then there was Ragnar, and Ragnar's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the taking of the gold is I want him, I accept him.
And it would have been the betrayal of the act of justice in a way if it had not been accepted.
Yeah. And it has this added meaning now. I mean, the meaning of the act of justice, the meaning of this man, the meaning of owning or accepting his act of saving the man. It's like when he comes home after the wedding at which he's damned Francisco and says, "You're the guiltiest man in the room," and then he acknowledges that night that, I ought to damn him. I think I should, but I like him. I didn't even know what it was to like a man. I'm falling for him. Daphne says you're falling for him.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, go ahead.
This is the vastness too. When he starts out, he's depressed, and so he's closed in on himself. And then he meets Ragnar, and he's open, and suddenly he's connected to the world. But Ragnar's left, and that, to me, that was the vastness.
Yeah.
We couldn't even feel it before.
He's out in the world, but now where is he?
Yeah.
So we had a Rearden who was detached from. Have we seen him this way before?
Yeah, when he went to Dagny's, apartment that time.
Yeah.
Where he's totally closed in, couldn't even touch the people around it, and suddenly the lights go on.
And he can't even summon up a physical desire for Dagny. He has this trap. What got him that desire back again?
Thinking of the motor.
Thinking of the man who made the motor and seeing Dagny's response, how Dagny was standing and how the city looked, all in the view of this idea of the man who made the motor and how she responded to it. So that's also interesting. All right. So Ragnar's presence had a similar effect on him. Francisco's has had a similar effect on him. Okay. Let's move on now to the third sequence. We're about where I thought we would be time-wise, accounting for all the technical issues. So that's good. All right, so there's a tunnel catastrophe. Very quickly, the immediate direct causes. A coal-burning locomotive was set into a tunnel with inadequate ventilation because the tunnel was designed for diesel locomotives, which are less smoky. The suffocation causes a panic. In the panic, the train is stopped midway and can't be restarted. And they're stalled out on the tracks. It crashes with a train carrying munitions, causing a giant explosion that destroys the tunnel. Probably everybody in the train was dead already, but now the tunnel is caved in and everyone on the other train. So that's the immediate situation. That's what happens. why does it happen? Well, one element is that the initial diesel engine that the train had that would have taken it through the tunnel was destroyed and couldn't complete the run. Why did that happen?
It was appropriated.
It wasn't appropriate. Oh, no, I mean, the train was, riding along. It had an engine.
Yeah.
It would have driven through the tunnel, but something happened, and now its engine is broken and it can't go through.
Okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. It's
So-
this split rail.
Yeah, there's a split rail. Why is the rail split?
Because it wasn't replaced when it should have been.
When was it going to be replaced?
Before the,
Before he directed 10289.
Correct.
That's right.
On the morning of Directive 10289, what she was about to do was say, was contravene somebody's order to redirect the rail that was going to replace this section of rail with rail that would replace the Miami to Washington division, where we can't afford to make a bad impression.
the Washington-Miami line.
Yeah, the Washington-Miami line. Why is there so little rail that they've got to scrounge between which broken area gets its rail replaced? So baby, that didn't happen because Daphne didn't countermand that order because she quit. That's interesting. Why is there so little rail that they have to do this?
The quantities were limited, weren't they? How much rail you could buy was limited?
In part. Also, but
Also
Rearden
making
was
a
going
bunch
to give
of
them
stuff.
a lot of extra rail,
Oh, he couldn't get the.
but he couldn't get the copper to do it.
Correct.
Why is that? Well, because all the Danneskjold copper is getting sunk,
And
why
the
is-
US has no copper.
and the U.S. has no copper. Why?
Because the Argentinian and Chilean governments set up the US industries.
Yeah, there's been all these kind of protectionist or counter-protectionist, I guess, measures to favor the import of copper because of people who had invested in Danneskjold copper and wanted to strangle off the supply of U.S. copper to help it. So there's all this scheming. I'm just pointing out to see how this is at the end of a whole lot of causal sequences, right? And therefore Rearden can't get the money. Okay. All right. So now we know why the rail wasn't there, why that led to this diesel breaking. Well, what would have normally happened after this diesel went off the tracks?
They have an extra diesel at the Winston Tunnel, where they always used to keep one there.
Right. Daphne made it her strictest rule that it should be never left without a diesel. Why was it then left without a diesel?
The Washington-Miami line, right?
Well,
Or,
Chip Morrison, well, why should we deal with, says Clifton Losey, right? The alleged possible physical disaster, sometimes theoretical disaster down the road of not having the diesel there. We have the very real practical catastrophe of Chip Morrison getting angry at us. This is Chip's special. He demands this diesel. This is what Eddie almost quits over. So the diesel's been diverted. Why is it a big deal? Why don't they have any extra diesel?
the manufacturer.
Nielsen.
Yeah. I mean, they've been having trouble with this since the beginning. In 1-4, Daphne's gone to United Auto Works. She's been waiting on diesels forever. She can't get them. A few chapters later, we learn from Eddie that there's, in a conversation with this worker, useful sort of exposition, that there's now hope because United Auto Works has finally went out of business, gone bankrupt, and it was bought by Dwight Sanders. But no sooner do we learn this, that Dwight Sanders quit. And then in a few chapters later, Nielsen, who's electrical motor manufacturer up to this point, is retooling to make diesels, and he's been, still hoping to do that. But in 2.5, Nielsen Motors is Colorado. Nielsen Motors Colorado. He's the last shipper on the John Galt one, the only one that's still there, with cargo to ship when they close the line. And when they close it, he disappears. So now there's no place to get diesels and no hope of getting them. And they just have to deal with the coal trains they have until the diesels run out. Also, the ventilation is in a state of disrepair. That also might be due to Daphne's being gone. All right, so now we see all the things that we've looked at in the book up until now that have gotten us into the state where we now have a diesel, the diesel engine's broken by going off the rail. There's no diesel engine to replace it. This is a tunnel that you can only go through with a diesel engine. And so why everybody on the line is supposed to have known that you can't do this. You can't go through there with anything but a diesel engine. You certainly can't go through with a coal burning engine. We'll need death for everybody on line. So why is it censored?
They're there to take orders, and everybody does not act on their knowledge.
Evasion. Evasion is a topic we've been talking about a lot in the book. I think that is relevant here. Evasion in particular of responsibility, maybe also of knowledge, but the particular version we're seeing is people who just want to take orders. Where have we seen this before in this chapter?
Yeah.
Betsy?
Well, mostly everybody, for various reasons, isn't acting on their best judgment. Either because it's going to get them into trouble, or because they don't want to bother, or they don't like what's going to happen if, the conclusion they'd have to come to, etc. But for various reasons.
Is there a couple of different categories in which we might put the people who are acting against their best judgment or making wrong decisions here? Let's look at types. First of all, there's Kip Chalmers himself. He's the one who's on this train, who's demanding that the train be sent through. He's making threats. Well, what can we say about his attitude towards this? Any thoughts about Chalmers and his attitude?
He's just like the woman in the very first scene when Dagny comes out and says, the woman at the beginning says, I expect transportation. Or maybe that's not this time.
I think that's another woman you're
Sorry.
thinking of.
But
Later scene.
the Dagny in the first scene, doesn't she say to the people, like, your job is to run a train, like you don't look at a red light for 4 hours, your job is to run the train.
So nobody wants to take any responsibility. And I think this is true. I don't think this is exactly the issue with Kip Chalmers, but it's the issue with a lot of other people. So who are the people who are suffering from, or making others suffer from this type of motivation? Who aren't taking responsibility, aren't doing their jobs, aren't making decisions, are waiting to be given orders, or to find someone else to make the decision for them. Who are examples of that in this chapter? So Clifton Losey is the guy that Eddie tells us from the beginning, right? He doesn't want to run trains. He just wants to impress Jim.
Jim himself.
Jim himself. Yeah. So how does this whole chain get started, right? Kip Chalmers calls or telegrams Jim. Telegraph, I guess.
Yeah.
He gets a message to Jim.
Text him.
Yeah, he texts him. And yeah, WhatsApp. Okay, so, and what does Jim do? Jim pawns it off to Losey. Doesn't tell Losey what to do or give any thought to the situation. Just, get him a train, right? At least with my sister, I have to have gotten out of bed. What does Losey do?
Passes it to Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, Mitchum. And
then doesn't he leave town with his girlfriend?
Yeah, and then make sure he can't be found. So he can't be followed up. What is Mitchum? Who is Dave Mitchum anyway?
He's Kinnan's
Buddy?
Oh, you're right.
I don't think he's Kinnan's guy. That's the
Claude Slagenhoff's brother.
He's Claude Slagenhoff's brother-in-law. Now, Claude Slagenhoff,
Friends of Global Progress.
the head of Friends of Global Progress, which is a kind of progressive group that was campaigning for the Equalization of Opportunity Bill way back in the beginning. He's someone who's got some political pull. Wesley Mouts thinks he's an important constituency. How does this get him on the railroad? Well, because when Jim goes to Mouts with the deal he's going to turn over the secret of, they can blackmail Rearden with in exchange for getting a freight rate raise. Mouch does something that's their typical style of business. We're thinking about what business people this is the typical style of, which is trying to squeeze everything they can out of each particular deal. Not, in other words, trying to build a business relationship into the future and win-win, but just like, I'm going to try to win this deal by chiseling a little more out of you. And when he chisels a little more out of James there, and a little bonus he tries to get on this deal, is a job for his brother-in-law. Now, what's the deal with Mitchum? What kind of a guy is he?
The standard of value is seniority. Is he the guy?
Yeah.
Well, I want to see where you're going.
All right.
Also, it says Mitchum spent his life slipping around the necessity of making a decision. He would wait to be told what to do and
Exactly.
whine against injustice.
He keeps getting fired or losing jobs. Yeah, do you want to add?
I mean, there's more to it than, so this is what I want to see he's still different than Jim in terms of Jim won't make a decision, doesn't want to make a decision. You get Mitchum thinking about maybe won't allow the train to go in, and then what he thinks about in regard to what that would mean. So he would be blamed for it. What could he do if he's blamed for it? Could he go, if he gets fired, could he go to court and say, well, there's no standard, there's no courts, there's no standards of evidence, there's nothing about proof. So he doesn't just go, he does a moment when he thinks no, but then the considerations that enter are interesting. And in this theme of legality and illegality that's running through the chapter, it's relevant, I think, to think about.
Yeah, the Dave Mitchum was not good at understanding problems of engineering and transportation, but he understood men like Clifton Roach.
Right. And there was also, is it him or is it that is the one who doesn't know philosophy of law, but he knows that when there are those standards, principles, there's no evidence. So, yeah, so Locy is in a way Mitchum is in a way in the pattern of Locy and Jim, but there's another element to him too. Now he's someone who's been fired from a bunch of jobs, not really anything in particular wrong, just because he never took any initiative. He said, no one told me to do any times and so forth. Now this is his one good job he's ever had. And he's being framed up on it. Because he knows, in a way, Jim didn't even bother to figure out what's happening. Locy figured out a little bit of what was happening, but just pushed the problem down to Mitchum. Mitchum's the first one who might actually deal with the problem, right? But the problem is he either has to take responsibility for not giving Kip Chalmers, who's being belligerent and threatening about this, because he knows the only practical way to deal with people is force and threatening. He has to deal with the practical immediate catastrophe of that and be blamed for being the one who got the government upset at us or some middling level. He's not even an important government official, it turns out, right? Low-level government official upset at us. Or if he sends the engine through and everyone dies, he has to take responsibility for that. And this is what Jim had evaded. This is what Locy had evaded. Now it's on Mitchum. Should he make the choice? Should he do it? Maybe in a better system where he could trust that if he made the right call. Because here he does know what the right call is. And that's significant, right? He's not a good railroad map worker, but he knows this is the wrong decision to do. And this goes now to your point, Betsy. He's the first person who has his better judgment, but is not following it. He's someone who could have risen to, or at least a different version of this occasion, he would have done the right thing. Because what's striking about this is it's a ridiculous, calamitous action that's taken. Everybody past a certain point knows better.
Yeah. Another thing is how many people, any one of which could have stopped it and didn't for various reasons.
So then we have the next person it passes to, that Mitchum passes it to. And this is the scene you were reading, Robert, of this is now, he could, what was it, outwit, he could, could beat Bill Brent, beat him at any issue in engineering, but here was something in which you could beat Bill Brent. So who's Bill Brent? Bill Brent is the best dispatcher on the system. He's the one person in the conversation with Mitchell had started out by naming the things people didn't want to name.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. And Mitchum tries to set up Brent in the way that Mitchum himself was set up by Losey.
He's the one who's punched, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he quits rather than following these orders, right? These are orders that I'm going to go off looking for a diesel where he knows he's not going to find it. If you don't get one, if I'm not back with this time, order the train through, but he won't put it in paper. So he's trying to get Brent. Let me look at, Dan, are you still with us? And do you have any thoughts you want to add on this or any things you want to encourage me to focus on?
I'm still here. I don't have any other particular point.
Okay. So if you see, we can see Mitchum as a kind of mixed case between Losey and another type of person who's involved in this. And let's speak about the other people. So Brent refuses to do it. He gets punched, trying to quit. Who else? There were other people here, as long as the people who could have stopped it, people who could have done the other thing, but don't make the decision to stop it, act against their better judgment in one way or another. Who are these people? Well, there's the road foreman, who has this same kind of thought process of he would be punished, he wouldn't be rewarded for doing the right thing. In particular, he's put in the position of having to choose between sacrificing his family and sacrificing the passengers, which wasn't ever possible for. He earned the security of his children by securing the passengers, by providing for the passenger safety. But now that's not the case anymore. He didn't know anything about ethics and moral philosophy, but he knew he wasn't going to do this. He knew if that was virtue, he's not going to follow it. All the theories that people talk about, they're now coming up against something in his lived life that he's not willing to deal with.
Well, Bill Brent as well, there's something on his background, and if he's the one who just got married or
He's going
to get married.
To get married finally. Yeah.
But the difference with Frank, I thought was interesting, is that he saw what he was giving up on it, but he put the two together and the others wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was, either I'm moral and I follow this, or I have a family. And he's recognizing, there's a line in there where he's so sad because it's like this distant memory that he has. He knows he's not going to get it, but it doesn't have a role in this.
He can't be a part of this decision. Yeah. He's a really interesting character.
Very positive.
Yeah.
He knew nothing about epistemology.
Yeah. What do you know?
Yeah.
Because he's another example of this trend. And it's these people who know nothing of X, but they know Y. That this signal is coming with these people who are in this other position where it's not pure evading of responsibility. In some of them, there is some evading of responsibility, there is with Mitchell, but it's not pure evading of responsibility. It's also, they're finding themselves in a kind of society that's structured in a way that it would be some kind of a sacrifice for them to to act on their best judgment.
And then also, I think the Rogues Gallery at the end, the group at the end, it makes clear that they can't be excused because they don't know epistemology or moral philosophy.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
How could you?
Well, there's also the train master, who's an interesting case.
But that's something.
Okay. Well, I mean, he's interesting. I think because one should see some parallels to Rearden with him. So he's invested his whole life in one thing, his brother and his brother's success, and is an pours everything into that in the way you could say Rearden pours it into Rearden metal, and then he loses it. It's taken, and he thinks of it as taken away. I mean, his brother commits suicide after Directive 10/289, and then his complete indifference to people and the world, similar to how we met Rearden early and before he meets Ragnar and gets some connection again. And the way that what's driving his decisions is the indifference. Like, at some point he would have known and would have cared of what he's doing. He doesn't care now of what he's doing.
He knows nothing of political philosophy, but he knows that the moment when the newspaper publisher, when the newspaper publisher won't publish the account of his brother's death, which he thinks people need to know because the directive wasn't there. His brother kills himself after the directive closes all the scientific establishments, and so there's nothing for him to do now that he's worked his way through college and so forth. It's done, the conditions of his suicide were made by the people. The people need to know about this. No, it's not good for morale.
You mentioned the publisher and the newspaper? That's interesting. There's a newspaper publisher in the train. Again, I hadn't thought that.
There's a lot of interesting parallels between the people in the train and particular other characters. I don't know for everyone if there is. And I mean, Ben and I were even talking about, Ben tends to be on the lookout for places where two different characters might turn out to be the same person. I think in most of these cases, they're not meant to be the same, but we're meant to think there's just a lot of people like that in this world. But there's someone who's very much like Paul Larkin on the train. There's someone like this publisher, I think. Yes, he knows nothing of political philosophy, but he knows at that moment where he was told it would be bad for morale for the people to know that they led to your brother's thinking it no choice but suicide, is when he loses all concern for the life or death of other people. They're not people to him anymore. And this is, I think, yes, it's the same state as written. And I think we should be on the lookout for characters entering that state. I think we'll see more of it as we go forward. Then there's the conductor. Before he'd seen their safety as part of his job, but now they ask for an accepted Directive 10/289. They continue to live and work under it. What did he owe them? Would any of them stand up for him if he made a fuss? And so he just slips off into the night, letting the train go by. There's a switchman who once risked his life to save a train. These are people who cared, who would have done better. I think Mitchum is just kind of mixed case character as we go down the road.
And the switchman's described as he's going to hate his job from here on out.
Oh, yeah.
Then there were a few people who were ignorant, I think, involved. The night dispatcher and the fireman. Maybe they should have taken more of an interest in their job, but they didn't. So it must be less dangerous than I thought.
Well, and they're described as respecting their superiors, and that had some kind of meaning when Dagny was there. It doesn't have meaning when Loson's there.
Finally, the guy who's willing to drive the train in.
Oh, but you missed the boy.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, that's the young night dispatcher.
Oh, is that, yeah.
But he's the most, because the fireman, I think, is a little less, I mean, he's still relatively innocent, but this young boy who had admired Bill Brent, who had, his vision of a railroad man was out of a century ago.
Right. Can I make a comment? For people who like comparative literature and possible influences on Ayn Rand, Tora Buchman, I don't know whether he does it in one of the essays there, but he certainly does it in one of his lecture courses. He sees a possible connection between Schiller's Mary Stuart and this scene in particular, because if you know that play, Mary Stuart gives the order to execute Elizabeth II to, I think the character's name is Davidson, and basically says something along the lines of, if it becomes necessary, pass this order on to the, and I think there's a real possibility, you can see Ayn Rand thinking, okay, that was a brilliance, because she was a great admirer of Schiller, saying, okay, I'll take your one passing of the message, and I'll give you 6 or whatever it is. Yeah.
And I'll raise you a railroad.
Yeah. But I always thought that was one of the more plausible and influences in the way that she recognized that she could be influenced by people like Hugo.
Yeah, Tora's pieces, Tora Buckland's his pieces on this kind of thing are really brilliant. There's a discussion of the influences in the character of Francisco.
Another Schiller play, the Conspiracy of Fiesco.
Yeah.
There's the main characters.
Probably few enough people know what happened in that play. It's not a spoiler, it's just a.
Right.
But anyway, so another book, really good book. And also Tora's work elsewhere in a companion to Ayn Rand and the other books in that too. So the dead end, the last guy on this chain of command, Joe Scott, the engineer who's going to drive the train through the tunnel, who agrees to do it. The other engineer, who's the one who brought the engineer from the initial train, said he's not going to do it, he's crazy. But Joe Scott will. Who's this guy?
He's the friend of Fred.
Yeah, he's drunk, first of all.
And drunk. Which has generally been frowned upon.
This is generally been frowned upon. He was fired, but now he's a safe man. He can't be fired. Yeah, because he was reinstated. He is a friend of Kinnan. This is for everyone who helped Kinnan deal with his, issues on the railroad. And for the people I was objecting last week to the people who were taking, I thought, too kindly an attitude towards Fred Kinnan. And there's respects in which he might be. There are, along certain axes, he's less deplorable than some of the other people. But I mean, he's someone who chose to make his life creating this kind of world, and pretending that he's not. Right? Oh, you guys made it. So there's nothing he can do about it.
And the infraction caused a major wreck.
Yeah. I think Kinnan is a bit like one of the passengers on the train says, me, I can get along in any system, right? And that's Kinnan too. I can get along in this system. I can find a way to rig it. So why are the buck passers in charge? The Taggart, the Clifton Locy's, somewhat Mitchum, although he's the mixed case. Why are these people in charge? And why are the people who are better than them, including Mitchum in his intermediate state and the people over there, disempowered or demotivated?
It rots from the top and Dagny isn't there.
So Dagny's not there. The better people quit. Not only Dagny, right? Yeah. Dagny quit because of Directive 10-289. The regional manager in Nebraska quit because of Locy and his decision to pull away the diesel. Sorry, I forget. No, that was for something else. They quit because of Locy. The head of the Colorado division quit. Bill Brent quit. The first engineer, I mean, he wasn't in a position to do anything, but he at least quit.
The conductor.
The conductor.
He opted out.
Is he the one who jumped?
Yeah.
Disappeared.
And the better people, they feel they're not protected. Right? They're in a position, or not the better people, but the people who haven't quit, the people who are there that are better and who aren't quitting over this, know that they're in a position where they're going to have to sacrifice themselves or their loved ones in order to save the people on the train, who, having been saved, won't defend him when he's taken before the unification board. And before the unification board, he has no chance. So you can see this because of 10-289 most immediately in the following way. It leads the good people to quit. We've seen a bunch of good people that quit. Right? It creates these kind of irreconcilable conflicts of interest. And it makes the railroad and the whole economy inhospitable to good work, to thinking, to acting on your best judgment. Yeah. Now, whether it's only this directive or not is a good question. This directive is a culmination of a kind of policies we've seen in other forms. But
well, she mentioned the educational system with the boy or whatever.
The teacher on the train.
No, not the. Where's the? Sorry.
The wet nurse?
No, the last person who, the buck, before Joe Scott.
The young kid.
Yeah,
Dispatcher who's.
right. There,
Yeah, pull that up. I'm not remembering details of it.
oh, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm mixing them up with someone else.
That's that.
The ninth dispatch.
I thought he was one of those college-bred people, but I could be mixing that up.
Um,
No,
Yeah, no, Century Club.
someone else is,
he's just inexperienced.
Yeah,
he's-
but he's young, inexperienced, conscientious, looked up to Bill Brandt as a kind of 19th century heroic image of a railroad man. And this is not what he's finding in his work, but he hasn't caught up yet. Right, so let's turn to the last sequence in the chapter, or the last bit of this sequence, which is where it narrates who's awake on the car. And it takes us through a number of the passengers and tells us a little bit about their lives or their views, opinions. And these were the people, well, let me just pull up this. It is said that catastrophes are a matter of pure chance. And there were those who would have said that passengers of the comet were not guilty or responsible for the thing that happened to them. And then we get narrated their various viewpoints and descriptions of their life. After that, these passengers were awake. There was not a man aboard the train who did not share one or more of their ideas. As the train went into the tunnel, the flame of Wyatt's torch was the last thing they saw. Now, this scene is interesting and striking, and has led to a lot of controversy for a number of reasons. I mean, it sounds like the author is blaming these people for their death. They deserved it in some way. Wyatt's torch is like a symbol of justice. She says it said that the people weren't guilty or weren't responsible. Rand herself stresses this aspect of the scene. She calls this whole sequence in the book the damnation sequence, not just the bit on the train, but this whole sequence from the crash onward, and from when it goes off the rails onward. And let me just read you two comments by Rand connected to this. The first is from the essay, The Moratorium on Rain, named after this chapter, after this remark, which is an essay. Does anyone remember? I think I said last week. Does anyone know what the Moratorium on Rain is? An essay about Bessie?
Well, it was also a Fort Hall Forum speech. Yeah.
On what topic though?
Wage and price control. Nixon's wage and price control.
Yeah.
At the end of it, she says, I suggest you read or reread the last sequence of Chapter 7, Part 2 of Atlas Shrugged. It will show you the effects and causes of a national freeze better than I can do it here. Privately, I call that passage the damnation sequence. And here's from an untitled letter, which is a piece on egalitarianism and love. I list the train passengers who were philosophically responsible for it, in hierarchical order, from the less guilty to the guiltiest. The last one on that list is a humanitarian who had said, the men of ability, I do not care what or if they are made to suffer. They must be penalized in order to support the incompetent. Frankly, I do not care whether this is just or not. I take pride in not caring to grant any justice to the able where mercy to the needy is concerned. And this is, aside from just being something she would think is despicable and unjust, in stark contrast, especially to what that we see in the chapter on Ragnar, there's Robin Hood, if ever you saw the kind of vision of Robin Hood that Ragnar is against. There's a lot of things going on here. there's a lot to say about these passengers and their ideas. It's an interesting issue if they're ranked from least to most guilty. Why this ranking? And that, what resolution does that operate? Are there any people equally or so forth? But is it right that the people are guilty? Are they responsible? In some sense, Rand seems to think they are. Are they? Is this fair? There are children on the train. The mother has tucked her 2 children into bed. Are they guilty? Are they responsible? What sense of responsibility? Maybe they're not meant to be included. There was not a man aboard the train who didn't share one of their beliefs. Maybe the children aren't men. So maybe they're accepted.
No.
There was a lot of discussion in the years immediately preceding Ayn Rand's writing about the Shrugged about the moral aspects of strategic bombing of Nazi Germany. And also whether it would have been moral to bomb Auschwitz so that the death factory would have to stop. And Hannah Arendt, who at that point was just coming to public attention, had studied the history of Auschwitz inmates, all of whom were saying, why didn't you bomb Auschwitz? There were all these people who were being murdered, and I would have had a better chance of escaping if the guards had been bombed. Maybe not a very good chance, but at least some chance. And the same thing applies to innocent people, the 5% who didn't vote for Hitler's dictatorship in Nazi Germany. 95% voted in the referendum to make Hitler dictator. What about the other 5%? Well, they probably would have preferred to be bombed than to be killed by Hitler directly.
Although in this case, there's not a man aboard the train who didn't share in it.
She used man generically.
Yeah, I don't mean a man as opposed to child. I mean, she's not saying in deference to the 5% on the train. The 5% on the train who were not responsible were somehow better off the train.
Well, maybe they weren't. The 5% are already quitting and going to those.
But how are these people? What does it mean to say they're responsible or guilty?
It means causally that they're responsible in a way that they laid the intellectual foundations for the activities of the people who were in fact physically responsible. You could see a parallel between the thoughts in the heads of the people making the fatal decision with the ideas spread by the people in the roomettes.
Any other thoughts on this? I think that's definitely true. Go ahead.
Is everybody guilty for holding the wrong ideas, or are they guilty for acting on the wrong ideas?
Some of these people acted on the wrong ideas. It's not clear that all of them, some of them just spoke about them, published about them.
Okay.
And some of them, I mean, the mother is an invader, right?
Yeah.
She's concerned, she has a legitimate concern, the well-being of her children.
Right.
But it expresses itself in evading the fact that her husband, and therefore I guess her well-being or whatever, depends on whether it's a directive.
And she tells, well, it only hurts the businessmen, right? Right.
Yeah, there's that.
So she's an invader.
No, it only hurts the rich.
The rich.
Yeah.
She's indifferent to justice, at least in certain situations.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be responsible? I mean, or to be guilty? Or what do they deserve this death? And if so, in what sense of deserve? Or do they not deserve? I mean, some of these words have more than one meaning, and it's not. But one thing you might be saying if you're saying they're responsible for it or they deserve it is someone should sentence them to this.
Yeah.
It's good that they die.
Yeah. Well,
Is that what's being said or what's being said?
So, but she says here, the passengers of the comet were not guilty or responsible. So there's some who are guilty and some who are responsible.
So maybe they're in different categories you're suggesting?
Or a little bit of both.
There's also the romantic artist's prerogative of disregarding the inessential. And I think in this case, she considers the possibility that some of them might actually have been innocent as irrelevant to the art. She's depicting something in a very romantic way here.
It would be one thing if she just didn't attend to this issue and suggested vaguely that all of them were guilty because there's no one, there's a society in which no one is. But she makes a point of it that they're all responsible. I think we have to think about why she's making that point. They're all responsible or guilty in some way. Let's think of it as another perspective. Because it's not, so from outside we can think about the artist's prerogative here and what the artist is doing. But also think about inside the world. Daphne could have prevented this. She didn't have to quit. If she was there, this wouldn't have happened. How should she think about this? Did she let innocent people die, and it's her responsibility, or what? How should we think about that? How should Daphne? How should we, the reader? How is the author thinking about these characters? Yeah, that's it.
Well, I think Ayn Rand is showing the causal sequence here, that these activities were caused by Directive 10289, and that these people in various ways were responsible for that directive existing.
I think she has just a completely opposite take on what living means.
Opposite to whom?
Opposite to the people who passed Directive 10-289. I mean, to say that, these people are alive, they are, but they're not pursuing it, they're not creating values, they're not, there's things that they say, like they're ready to sacrifice Rearden, they're ready for these people to be in trouble, they'll, these people died when these people didn't get their railroad bonds unfrozen. There's a certain, all of these people have a realm in which it is okay for people to be sacrificed. And the author, I think, she's showing the consequences in living of these kinds of ideas, and that they die. When you don't value your life and when you don't choose appropriately, bad things happen. You go out of existence. And the value that you place on life is something that you choose to do or not.
Just want to add anything on that? I have a few more stuff, but.
Well, I think it's relevant. You read one of the setup for it, but I think the two paragraphs are relevant for the setup. So you read about catastrophes are said to be pure chance. Well, and the first question is, was this pure chance? Is there responsibility? Is there guilt? But there's a special emphasis on justice here. As the tunnel came closer, so this is the paragraph before that, talking about the passengers, they saw at the edge of the sky far to the south, in a void of space and rock, a spot of living fire twisting in the wind. They did not know what it was and did not care to learn. And that, I think, is important to get about that.
They're not caring.
Yeah, he's not. And then if you read the descriptions, and if you think of what does justice require for someone to be actually care about justice, and will he just say the mother of the children that, yeah, my husband does bad stuff to people, but what does that matter? We've got to eat. Is that someone who cares about justice? The one of the most interesting, I think, where they're ranked too, is a professor of philosophy. If you think of things that are brought up in that, and think earlier in the story earlier in the chapter of them thinking of going before a tribunal, and would it be a court of justice or not? Wouldn't you? So things that are brought up, there's no mind. So do you want to judge who can think, or do you want to judge who can't think? There's no reality. Do facts matter in the courtroom, or do facts not matter? There's no principles. So can you know beforehand if what you're doing is legal or illegal? If there's no principles, there's no rights. There's no morality. He spent his whole life undercutting every element of justice. What's going to happen?
I think also the idea, Becky, that you've been bringing up about causality, and stressing the causality here matters. Because these are all people that are doing things, thinking things, enacting things that are bad, that are not on the morality of life, as Francisco would put it. Things that have consequences in the world that are harmful and destructive to human life. Some of them are much worse than others. Many of them wouldn't, maybe knowingly hurt somebody or would never send anybody to their death. But they're doing things that have destructive consequences. And it's a very different question if you say, is their death just? If you ask that question. Is there some element of justice involved in their death? Well, think of it from two perspectives. Would it be proper for somebody who was assigning a penalty to this mother who evaded the fact this is what her husband did? Would a proper sentence be, you should get the death penalty for this? But that's a very different question from if through her acting in this way, and lots of people's acting in this way, a situation arises where she dies. Is she innocent or culpable in her own death? And what would it mean to judge that she was innocent in her own death? What would have to happen for her not to die? What would have prevented her from dying?
Somewhere along that whole string that somebody made a different decision.
Yeah, so...
Well, most of all, if she hadn't had the political pull to get tickets on the best train remaining in the country, and, since Ayn Rand had actually lived in a totalitarian society, so this is something that she knew. To get tickets for that kind of train, you had to have political pull.
Okay.
And those were all people who had political pull to get tickets on the comet.
So you're saying these aren't everymen, so to speak. They are a special class of people who are guilty. They had political pull. They were connected.
I don't think she implied that.
Elderly
school teacher, I think.
Then turned generation of students into sniveling cowards. She seems like she maybe the teachers union got her take. It seemed like she would have had such. But okay, they might have been more likely to be politically connected. But what would have had to happen for the train not to go into the tunnel, given the setup of the situation? Daphne would have had to have remained at work as a slave or a slave driver. Would that have been just that Daphne should do that to prevent these people who don't bother to give any thought to what it does to her, who's busy keeping them alive, to keep them from dying? That's what would have been just? Or this guy who, if he had said, caused this fuss and stopped the train from going through, and then he was pulled up before the unification board, and he would get fired, and his family would starve to death, and none of these people, they wouldn't, we're not given any reason to think any of them would have stood up for him. So is the just solution that their lives should have been saved at the price of, he should have saved their lives at the price of his kids? I mean, if all of these people are putting out into the world, starting causal chains, that are causal chains that are going to culminate in death and destruction somewhere, maybe most of the time it won't come back right to bite them, but someone's going to have to pay for it. Someone's going to have to suffer. Isn't it right that it should be them rather than someone else who suffers for it? I mean, if I'm playing, I take out a gun and start waving it around and shooting at random, isn't it a just outcome if I'm the one who gets to, you know, I end up shooting myself rather than Robert or Betsy here? Right? Isn't that, I mean, if by luck no one gets shot and I just get arrested and put in the mental hospital, maybe that's a better outcome. But if someone's going to die, and over the long course of things, if I behave that way, someone will die. Maybe I'm not aiming at some kind of weird application I have to shoot things off. But that's what these people are. Let me read from a letter Ayn Rand wrote on justice. This was to John Hospers. The basic principle that should guide one's judgment in issues of justice is the law of causality. One should never attempt to evade or break the connection between cause and effect. One should never attempt to deprive a man of the consequences of his actions, good or evil. That doesn't mean that if someone's doing something chancy and bad, you should necessarily intervene to make sure the worst possible consequence of the action applies to him. But you shouldn't intervene, let yourself get hurt, let someone else good get hurt, to make sure that the worst consequence doesn't befall. They're setting up a kind of situation where these kinds of consequences are going to happen and someone's going to suffer from it. In a world where nobody cares what happens to the able, who cares about justice to the able where the needy are concerned? In a world where you don't care about what happens to the people that your husband's brutalizing because they're rich, or where you're spreading to classrooms the idea that there's no mind, you can't know anything, there's no objective moral standards, or in a world where you're turning kids into cowards by treating them not to have confidence in themselves and just to go by the orders of others. Well, what's going to happen if there are lots of kids like that? Some of them are going to be running a train and they're not going to have the confidence to stand up for themselves when they get an order like this. What happens if you're going to convince people that they're no mind? They're going to vote in ways and accept laws and live by directives such that more and more this kind of thing is going to happen in the world. And, you know, maybe some of these people would over time have changed their ways, they're mended. And it's not necessarily a better world that these people died than if they're probably on the train before them and the train after them. A lot of people worse than them, better than some of them. But if people are behaving like this, it's like drunk driving, right? If someone goes and drives drunk, it's not like you hope they die or take glee in their dying. But if you're going to write a novel about drunk drivers and they all get away and no one dies in it, no matter how much they drive drunk throughout it, that's something wrong with that more. I mean, it's what's metaphysically important, what matters, is that when people behave irresponsibly, there are consequences. And it's better if those consequences fall on them than somebody else. And it's wrong if other people, you know, push innocent people in the way of a drunk driver's car, that he'll mow them down, there'll be a soft landing before he falling and, you know, kills himself. But that's the equivalent of what it would be for these people who don't hold these views, Daphne or someone, to take it on herself to suffer, to prevent this kind of a catastrophe.
Isn't that like kind of the whole problem with this stuff? Is it kind of makes justice impossible. So you have, okay, well, I could stop this catastrophe, I could stop people from dying, but that's going to screw me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole system where that is the reality is not a just system, and that's the way it's been set up. And that seems like it's the problem.
Yeah, but then who's responsible for that system?
Yeah, and I think it's important that it be clear that it's not just Clifton Losi or Jim Taggart, the movers and shakers, or the whatever they do. The people
who don't move,
or don't move, shake without.
I think the opening of the chapter versus the closing is important. So we have Ragnar, who's a pretty unusual character, a pirate. He seems to be able to do a lot of things, take on armies by himself. But you have Eddie, and how does his attitude differ from all these other passengers? He has a radically different attitude towards businessmen, towards think about acknowledging them, and so. And that, I think that's part of what is going on in terms of justice and injustice. I think a lot of this chapter is about justice, and I think the setup, a part of it, the way to think of it, is at the end of the previous chapter. It's similar to what you read from. This is Rearden thinking. I think this is one of the really interesting perspectives he gains. There is no escape from justice. Nothing can be unearned and unpaid for in the universe, neither in matter nor in spirit. And if the guilty do not pay, then the innocent have to pay. And it's like, if you think of Bill Brent, like in Eddie Willer's character, I mean, either he pays or these people pay. There's not otherwise our alternative to that.
Because this debt, in effect, has been incurred. This destruction has been wrought, and then who's it going to land on? Yeah.
What I really like is the way that every link in the causal chain, is shown in detail. She didn't just say, there was a big disaster in the tunnel and people were killed. She showed how the ideas led to that.
Mm-hmm.
Step by step, person by person, mind by mind.
What about the kids? Right? The mother took 2 kids. They were in the birth in the car. They died.
Yeah.
Their mother killed them. She didn't know she was killing them, but she did.
I think that's right. I mean, we don't know how old. If they were infants, then they couldn't have shared any of these views. If they were 6-year-olds, maybe they could have shared some of them. Maybe it's not their fault that they shared them if they were 6, but the ideas you have are going to have an effect on your life. And even if you're not old enough to know better. But the main responsibility, I think, their mother. She cared a lot that they were tucked well into their birth. And she didn't care, their father. Maybe she's the one that we're told about. But, we hear about him too. She cared a lot about that they were tucked into their birth, but she didn't care much about where that birth was, how it got there, what kind of a world they were in, what her role in that world was. There's another interesting indication about causality in the chapter that's worth thinking of in connection with it. So Mitchum never had a good job, was always kind of eased out of his jobs. He always complained about the conspiracy of the big fellas, never give them a chance. And now he's getting set up, he knows he's getting set up, on the only good job he's ever had. But it wasn't part of his way of thinking to know that the frame-up and the manner in which he got the job were parts of the same whole. And that's, I'm not on the page of it right now. Let me see if I can find it. Is that, we'll just read it out.
The whole paragraph you want?
Yeah.
Dave Mitchum had spent his life slipping around the necessity of ever making a decision. He had done it by waiting to be told and never being certain of anything. All that he now allowed into his brain was a long, indignant whine against injustice. Fate, he thought, had singled him out for an unfair amount of bad luck. He was being framed by his superiors on the only good job he had ever held. He had never been taught to understand that the manner in which he obtained this job and the frame-up were inextricable parts of a single whole.
That idea of inextricable parts of a single whole, I think, is significant. It's part of Rand's view of causation. It's not this thing happened and then that thing happened and there's some probability that the next thing will happen. Use a kind of Humean view or statistical correlation view. There's some, chance involved, like, but I mean, if I play Russian, if I, shoot around the gun at random and then it lands in someone's head and they die, the bullet, it's not like I did one thing, I shot around the gun at random and then another thing happened at the end. And there is some correlation between when you fire off guns, but it's just my bad luck that people ended up dead. right? It's one action. I fired a bullet here, or into my own head. It's one thing. You think of the action as something that extends over time. And part of what this book is pushing us to do is think about the actions these characters are taking over time. Not think about a bunch of discrete events, but see one thing unfolding more and more over time over a larger and larger span of the book. That's something that Mitchum doesn't do, but we can see that his living in this way is part of him fumbling around irresponsibly in a way that's going to get people hurt. And in this case, it leads to this, and leads to him being in this situation. And likewise, we can see the people on the train leading a life that has consequences. Their manner of living and the fact that they're on a train where they die, or more generally, in a world where lots of people are dying because of reasons like this. Because it's a world that's indifferent to justice. Indifferent to justice, in particular, to the men of ability, about whom they couldn't care less. They never bothered to find out what the flame was. Well, that's part of the whole that's happening. And what we should be starting to see more and more as we go through the book, and Daphne's starting to see, is the event adding up to a whole. Something happened 12 years ago. Something's happening to Taggart Transcontinental. Something's happening to this world. Something's happening to Hank Rearden. What is it? It should be being less and less many different little mysteries, and more, what's going on here? What action, what whole is this all a part of? More on that when we get to every chapter subsequently, but especially part 3. Any last thoughts? Pretty much at the end of our time. Let me see if there's Ben, if you're listening. I followed that linking and now I can't get back. I told you I would be lost. Now I'm back to that one. I have Ben has a few points. The responsibility Ben was pointing out earlier of a lot of these people comes from the ways in which they refuse to take responsibility. They're responsible for not taking responsibility because in that case it's poetic. It's a poetic point that it's in effect a drunk driver who's the last link in this chain. It's a good metaphor, and one of the metaphors I just used actually.
I had a thought, but I would hate to end on Gilbert Keith Worthing.
Well, we can add something else after that.
No, I just think you can, the same way one goes through the last people in the train, you can go through, and she gives you enough information about Gilbert Keith Worthing and Laura Bradford and Lester Tuck, where each one of those is one of the guilty people that dies in the train. And even a British novelist who has no particular place to go.
Yeah, I always wondered that it's also a Chuck Berry song.
Well, that's what I'm referring to.
Was that an expression? Someone had no particular place to go, or was it just so happened that the phrase is used?
Riding along in his train. Anyway, but even he, I mean, he has he spouts these things, and there's a kind of a causal connection between his views and what happened to his own country. Mm-hmm. And what does he do? He comes to America, and
I don't see why you haven't nationalized your railroad
exactly
years ago. And are your railroads safe? He says at one moment, and the response is, "We've got so many directives and laws on them; those bastards wouldn't dare not be safe." The premise of Chalmers that the only practical way to rule people is by fear. One other more philosophical element connected to this. One thing that you see a lot, and this is the point Ben kind of wants to make. One of the things that's going on in that conversation in the train cab with, not cab, but the car with Worthington and
Lester Tuck, Laura Bradford,
Chalmers, is there's a interesting metaphysics going on. If one of those mountains should decide to crumble, it would wipe us out of, well, why should it decide to crumble? And there's a kind of agency and choice imputed to nature. But they're themselves not taking any agency or responsibility or choice. And they don't think, if anyone's read I'm sure everyone here, or many people here in the room with me, knowing many of you, and I expect some of you online have read Ayn Rand's essay, The Metaphysical versus the Man-Made. There's a lot of, and the distinction that she's drawing is between what facts about things are inherent in the natures of them and not up to anybody's choice, and what things are matters of someone's choice, and they have to be judged because they're matters of someone's choice. Whereas the things that are not just have to be accepted as facts to be dealt with. There's a lot of what's being evaded is what's chosen and what can be changed and what is metaphysically necessary. And part of what Chalmers is doing by saying they can, if they, they'll find a way to move us. It's not my responsibility to find a way. You'll do it. You have to do it. You can if you're scared enough and so forth, if you need to enough, is saying, well, there aren't actual facts here about what trains can work in which tunnels and what ventilation systems. There's just, nature is malleable. But my demand that I'm going to get transportation through this tunnel isn't.
Well, fear is the motivator too, right? I mean,
but the fear is coming from he's going to demand it. And his unification board, which he thinks he's got some pull over or convince people of, is going to force people to do it. That's an absolute. If you come before the unification board, and you don't have enough connections, you're going to suffer and you're going to die. It's not an absolute. What happens if you put a coal-burning locomotive into a tunnel that doesn't have a ventilation system that could get rid of the fumes? It's not an absolute. Who knows what will happen if you breathe in, a lot of smoke that the lungs can't handle. But it is an absolute that Kip Chalmers and the unification board can't be crossed. And if that's how you're thinking, if you have a moratorium on rain, you force people to obey someone's whims in defiance of their own best identification of the facts of reality. Don't leave any space for them to think about it. Or if they do think about it and notice it, don't leave them any ability to act on it in any way other than by throwing themselves in front of the train, to sacrifice themselves to save the people who couldn't care less and couldn't be bothered about their lives. Then this is
and so the word moratorium takes on its literal meaning.
Say more. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, we're at time. I apologize all for the technical difficulties. We're going to have to figure out what's going wrong such that we can't get our software to connect to Facebook Live. Hopefully, things will be back to normal for our next broadcast. But one way or other, our next broadcast will be in New York next week on Tuesday, where we will go on by our love. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for bearing with us, and thanks especially to Robert Knopf.
Oh, my pleasure.